Hey, what's going on, fight nerds? This is your boy Gashawn. I want to welcome you to Enter the Nerd. I want to get right into this topic, and it's about judging and the perception of what matters in these MMA fights, specifically in the UFC, and how commentators, analysts, and even former fighters, and of course the judges, muddy these waters by either A, not following the rules that they have already set, or just providing really biased commentary, which doesn't help casual fans understand exactly what's going on. And let's get into that. Now, when I say casual fans, that's not a slur. That's not a bad thing. It just, there's different levels of fan, meaning, let's just say a casual fan will only watch pay-per-views when a big fighter is fighting. And maybe they don't understand every intricacy of what's happening in a match, so they'll focus more on the thing that they can understand the most, which is, striking. Someone gets hit, they miss, they get knocked out, they're looking for only finishes. They might boo during the grappling exchanges because it's just a little bit harder to understand. That's okay, because there's a casual fan and everything. I'm casual in something. I can be a casual basketball fan because I don't watch the games every single time. I only watch it usually during the playoffs and stuff like that. So I'm a casual fan. That's not a bad thing. It's just a thing, right? And obviously there's certain fight fans who might train as well so they can understand it. Or some fans that just watch every single fight night and pay-per-view and they understand it at such a high level that it's almost like they train and they don't. I'm happy to say that a couple of my friends who I've done martial arts my entire life, and I obviously have a deep love for the sport as well. So a lot of times during the summer, specifically of 2020, I got them all to watch pretty much every fight night that happened from then to 2022. And some of them have actually started to train afterwards. So now they have this vast knowledge of the sport, and now they're getting into that part. So I'm actually really proud of them for that. That's a whole different story. Either way, the people who are casual fans, now, who do they look to fill in those knowledge gaps? They look to the Daniel Cormiers, the Joe Rogans, the Dominic Cruzes, the Michael Bispings, right? To fill in that knowledge. And the problem is that they all come from different directions, especially when it comes to who won the fight and how they decide, rather than looking at the most objective factor that's available to all of them when it comes to this, which are the stats. The numbers. After the Tyler Santos and Shevchenko fight, where everyone was screaming robbery, they were swearing that Santos won because of how much she was controlling her. The judges, actually, I remember that DC said in a video that he spoke to the judges and the commission, and they were like, listen, it's strikes or damage. We'll talk about that verbiage later. Strikes first, then control time second. And in that fight, even though she was controlling Valentina, she didn't inflict any damage, and Valentina was actually inflicting damage while being controlled. And the numbers supported that, so she won. Simple as that. That's why they followed that metric. Now, there's times where the judges don't follow that metric, which is the true robberies, where they say damage first and control time second, and the person has more strikes and still loses. Which brings us to the most recent case of that, which is the Strickland and Duplessis fight, and why a lot of people, specifically, I'll bring up two people when it comes to how this fight is viewed and how those waters get muddy. It was actually Daniel Cormier, I'll say, and Laura Sanko. Now, some people, I've heard weird comments like, oh, I don't like her opinion, whatever. Either way, she's commentating. They have her at the analyst desk. She provides a view, right? She trains herself. So we're going to get into what their interpretations of this fight were. So remember what I said. The judges say striking first or damage, then control time second. Based off of the numbers, which we're going to have up here, there are at least 3 to 4 rounds where Strickland outstrikes him. Now, there is some control time, but let's just think about this, right? DC gave a analysis. He said he thought Duplessis won because he said in the close rounds, he thought the control time edged it out. So let's look at there's 3 rounds in particular I want us to look at. Round 1, where there's almost a 20 strike differential with 30 seconds of control time with no ground strikes or anything happening in this round. So we can say Strickland won that because 30 seconds of control time with no damage versus 20 strikes, almost 20 strikes differential. Come on. Round 2, I believe du Plessis won that. 3, no control time, I believe. I could be wrong there. You can have it on the screen. There's no control time in round 3. And round 5, Strickland won that, and there was no control time. So I'm not sure what Daniel Cormier was looking at when he made that assertion because the numbers don't support what he said. And once again, before he made that video, he could have looked at that. But his bias is towards grappling, right? What does Laura Sanko say? She says something that a lot of people echo, which is this really weird, immediate damage. She says something like immediate damage or immediate, I don't know what that means. Immediate damage is worth more than accumulative damage. So if someone lands a big shot, it's worth more than a whole bunch of continuous shots. Now, she said, how much damage does this cause? She talks about it being the equivalent of 2 dials, and that depending on each strike that goes on, one dial goes further to one direction, the other. It's weird. And she even says something like significant strikes doesn't necessarily mean significant like the way people think it does. It sounds like she doesn't really understand that either. And that's not an insult towards her, because a lot of people don't seem to understand. But if you look it up, significant strikes, they're talking about like power strike and stuff like that. Because if you look at the numbers, right, it says total strikes and significant strikes. So what she's speaking of is already being taken into account, which is why those are 2 different numbers. And guess what? Strickland led in the significant strike one. There was a total strikes, which he had more of, and significant strikes. And I'm not talking about at the end of the fight. Per round, which is how these fights are judged, he had more. How didn't he win? And she's like, I know a lot of fans are looking at this. Yeah, because those numbers have to mean something. It's not about subjective. It's not about what you think should matter. The judges already said what they look at more. Based off of what they said, he should have won. It's not about what you think about what strikes. It is what it is. Now, there's an extra part to this, which is really interesting. Joe Rogan has said this. I remember he famously said this during like the Dominic Reyes and John Jones fight, where he believes that if you look at someone, you look at the last round and you see who's winning, you're like, well, if this fight were to go on with no time limit, who would be the one that wins that fight? Something of that nature. I'm paraphrasing a bit. That would be an awesome assertion if this were a street fight, right? Because in a street fight, people just fight, and then even if a person is doing really good in the beginning, if they end up on their back and everybody has to pull the guy off, you consider the guy who was getting pulled off the winner, right? The problem is that in this 5-round fight, they're being judged round by round. So if a person is winning 3 rounds and the other guy wins the last 2, it's still 3 rounds to 2. And despite what everybody believes, round 4 and 5, you don't get more points for 4 and 5. You get just as many points for stuff. That's why people go, the championship rounds, it means more. No, it doesn't. It's just those last rounds are usually traditionally only reserved for championship matches or main events. That's it. But there's nothing different about those rounds by how they're scored. But once again, if you were to listen to some of these commentators, you would think so. During the Strickland and du Plessis fight, John Anik said something really good to Dominic, because Dominic was speaking about damage that Sean had on his face. And he goes, look at that damage. And he goes, yeah, but that damage happened in like round 1. We can't hold that against him the whole fight like it's happening to him in perpetuity. That's what he said. But a lot of these fighters look at that. And I just want to get on that verbiage. Damage. What the fuck does that mean? Because it's not like my boy Hennef and Taylor always say this. There's no life bar over their head. You don't know exactly how much something has truly affected a fighter. There are people who get cut when you breathe on them. Right? That becomes subjective. Right? Remember in boxing, Arturo Gatti, you could slap him and his face would pretty much explode. So if you go by that visual, that's not a good way. Because that person could get busted open in the first round, look crazy, and still whip the other person's ass. But are we just going to look at the visuals? There was another fight that happened. Carol Rosa and Irene Aldana. Carol Rosa, on the scorecards, did more than Aldana. But they were looking at their faces. Even though Aldana's face looked messed up too, This girl hit her with leg strikes almost. She broke the record on her. But she still lost because they were more interested in the shots that were going to the face. But she outlanded her significantly. You can look at the numbers. You don't have to believe me. So the judges obviously deserve the lion's share of the blame because their decision can change the trajectory of a fighter's career. But then these commentators and analysts also have to take accountability for muddying the thought waters, so to say, by also using subjective means to look at these fights and not, okay, let me look at the numbers. Let me give you an example. When I had like a fight night at my house. Well, it was a pay-per-view, but all of my friends were there. We were looking at Alexander Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev 1. And we were looking at it and going, like, at the end, going, we think Alex might have won that. That was an emotional feeling. But then I said, you know what? As soon as they announced Islam won, I said, let's check the numbers because they could be right. And the numbers support it. He won. So during the fight, I'm not counting everything. But there is something that removes the emotion. We can't sit there and go, well, I feel like this mattered most. They tell you what they're looking at. Strike first, then control time. If the numbers match up to that, we got to shut the fuck up at that point. Nothing else. I think Sanko said, it doesn't tell the whole story. It tells like 98% of the story. And if you say immediate damage means more than cumulative strikes, why are we counting them? Why are we judging per round if the numbers don't matter? The numbers clearly matter. And you know why people hate numbers? Because if you look at that, 20 punches is 20 punches. 2 minutes control time, 2 minutes control time. That's it. You can't keep on inserting the bias inside of there. The numbers are what they are. In every sport, do you think a 30-yard touchdown and an 80-yard touchdown, do you think they score differently? No, obviously the pass was longer, but as long as they get into the end zone, it's still 6 points. Now they accumulate, they talk about those yards, they have to tell the story. How many completions were there? How many, interceptions? Those things also tell the story about how maybe one team was struggling and one wasn't, right? And those, once again, are objective. So my point of this is we got to get to a point, at least they do, where their message, and even though they're analysts, and yes, these are people who fought at a high level, they're still not without bias. And maybe they got to look at themselves and go, okay, so maybe we're also not aligning with what the commission is saying. And maybe when we put these thoughts out here, some of these casual fans who are looking to us to explain are also getting confused because we're saying something against what the numbers are showing, and then we're also discrediting what the numbers are saying as well. Like, don't really look at that. Don't look at it, then why is it there? And we can't say, and I heard, and I'm not sure how true this is, that the judges can't see the numbers. We see it after every round. When we're watching it on TV, they're keeping all the stuff here so we can see, like, okay, this is leaning in this person's direction. They don't have any access to that when they're doing that. They're just going by bias. And I know some of these judges are not MMA judges. They also don't understand, which is a problem as well. They don't even understand what's happening. They don't understand some of the intricacies. That's what I'm hearing, some of them. I can't say for all of them, right? But we got to fix that as well. But this is kind of my rant when it comes to this, where it's like, okay, we have an objective measure. Why are we still judging these fights by emotional and subjective and biased means where we already have something that we can go by? And when the judges think like this, it quite literally changes the course of fighters' careers. Whether some of the commentators want to admit it because sometimes they like the fighter who won. So they go like, all right, when he's part of my team, I like that. But that's just my take on it. Let me know what you think. Do you think, what do you think about how things are being judged? How do you think about how a lot of these ex-fighters or just commentators are inconsistent about the messaging around fights and almost seem to take away the context that this is a sport. This is not a street fight. It is judged round by round with scoring taking place. Let me know, fight nerds.